It's working. So hello.
Here we are. Well,
idea.
It says live.
I've hit live. I'm connected after a couple of tries. But yeah, I'm beginning to wonder if 9:08 sounds awfully precise.
I mean, I think it was sort of tongue-in-cheek, wasn't it?
It's okay. Yes. All right. Very good. So our friend Wes, who appears on this with us from time to time, has had his baby. His wife has had. They have had their child just tonight. So name TBD, which I think is an unusual
It's a strange name. Yeah.
These are the days we live in. So yeah, he's all like, she was ready to have that baby. It was time. I think the 15th was the actual due date. So
yeah, that's not bad.
Well,
pretty close.
Don't tell her. Yeah. But she, so yeah, she's been ready to have that baby for a little while yet. So we're excited about that.
That is exciting.
Do you have a tea tonight? You don't seem to have it. Oh, you do have a tea. What is it?
In my Baden coffee mug will totally plug Baden Coffee, the best coffee shop in the county.
Where is it? And this is my RTS koozie cup thing they gave us for General Assembly.
This is just
alumni gathering.
English breakfast tea, because it was what I grabbed.
Okay. Very good. Tonight, so if you're just joining us, this is Theology by the Book. And hopefully, if Christian will continue to do this for a time yet, or I'll grab somebody else, I guess, we'll do more books, different books, and books that we can actually read because they're no longer under copyright and things. I think as long as the author has been dead for 70 years, I think that's what I read at some point. Then
hey, let's like Irenaeus.
Aaron who?
Augustine. Irenaeus. We can reach way back.
We can legally. So but tonight we are we have a book that we're going through at our church. We've Parenting by God's Promises. We're encouraging people to purchase or listen to. Purchase the hard copy or purchase the audiobook and read along with us. We have a few people doing that at our church. And of course, we download these, put them in podcast form so people can also just listen to it at a different speed if you desire. And just to talk about the book, because it's difficult these days to get people together to talk. We do a lot of that, but this is just an online presence that we're going to do, and so anybody can join us anywhere who would like to do that. And I'm sorry, I was trying to multitask. We are in chapter 12, and it's called Exercising Loving Rule as Kings. Did you do your reading?
Yes, not as deeply as I would have liked, but it happened.
Well, who has the time to read as deeply as we would all like? So this one is so it sets up a few things I've noticed, because what I wanted to do is I've noticed if you read it sort of just like we read the whole book, I actually listened to the whole book, and then as I'm reading it and going through it chapter by chapter, one of the things I'm noticing is we begin to discuss some things that he discusses in more detail in following chapters. So what I tried to do this time was I read this chapter, and he talks about corporal punishment, which we might talk about probably. But in the next couple of chapters, he actually goes into more detail about corporal punishment. So there's no need for us to really, tonight is really setting up the idea for discipling or disciplining our children with preventive disciplining and corrective disciplining. Am I
Right.
saying that word right? That doesn't sound right for some reason.
I would just
You say what?
say discipline.
Discipline, right? So there's preventive and corrective. So that's
Yeah.
the idea. And so he has two verses, two pericope sections of scripture that he talks. He puts at the beginning of the chapter. So I'm going to read those. I'll tell you what I'll do, since I seem to be a little tongue twisted tied today. I'll read Acts 2:36. If you would like to read Hebrews 12:7 through 9 and 11 in the King James.
Thanks.
It's just a lot. Do you mind?
No, not at all.
You have a better voice anyway, and I need to take a drink of my water. So Acts 2:36. Let all the house of Israel know assuredly that God hath made that same Jesus, whom ye have crucified, both Lord and Christ.
If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons. Furthermore, we have had fathers of our flesh which corrected us, and we gave them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? Now no chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby.
Yeah, I forgot that word was in there. I honestly did not ask you to read that because that word righteousness was in there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
I
know what?
didn't. I
We're
didn't.
pushing through it.
I just remember one time I was there. We were at an evening worship service in Andrews, South Carolina, and there was a teenager in the sanctuary with us, and we were reading different scriptures, and I had him read one from the King James where it talked about all the men who were in the line, but it didn't say all the men who were in the line. It says all those who pisseth against the wall.
Mm,
It was like, well,
why?
maybe some of them, I guess. So anyway, my humblest apologies. That's the
It's a
King James,
technical
though,
term.
man. It
It's a
is
technical
a
term.
technical term.
I was reading the Bible. How is somebody going to get mad at me for reading the Bible?
Well, actually, so
Only if it's not. The only people going to get. Never mind.
okay, we're off the subject. So now this is where he sets it up here. So Jesus Christ reigns today as our eternal King. But the Bible says parents are to administer the rule of Christ in the home. And so this is the setup. So he talks about how parents fulfill the three roles of prophet, priest, and king, just as Christ does. And so, but we're under him as prophet, priest, and kings. And so as we're seeking to lead our children to parent with to parent by God's promises, this has to do with the kingship role. And so he's the loving rule as kings. And he gets into several things here. So we'll just kind of jump into it. He quotes 1 Timothy 3 through 5, sorry, chapter 3, verses 4 through 5. And he says that a leader in a church should be one that rules well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? And the word with all gravity can mean dignity or respect. And so this is one we talk about a lot with officers when we're saying somebody's going to be an elder or somebody's going to be a deacon. How are you ruling in your home? And if they're ruling well in their home, then they can rule well in the church, possibly. But if they are not ruling well in the home, then they can't rule well in the church. And ruling well, that's what he gets into a little bit, because I think that's what I'd like to kind of get into a little bit, is this idea of ruling has a very negative connotation because we're used to our culture has kind of gotten into in my opinion, we're in where patriarchalism is like this bad thing. Being men is a bad thing. Being a ruler is a bad thing. Having commanding is a bad thing. It's because we've seen, and I think we've seen examples of it being really done poorly in the past. but there are also examples of being done really well, and those things aren't really magnified or brought to the forefront. We
Well,
tend to look at the negatives, much more brightly.
and it makes sense too, because our flesh is always going to want to rebel against against godly authority and the framework that God has set up. We're always going to rebel against that, even if it's good for us. I mean, yeah, because you can see places throughout history that flourish under good leaders, whether that's a family or a company or I think, or a country. I mean, Israel flourished under people like David and Solomon, and Hezekiah, but they were, and Josiah, they were good kings, which means in some ways they were, ruling. Well, not in some ways, in all ways they were ruling.
Well, yeah, and if you're not ruling, then the crowd is ruling, or the queen mother,
Mom ruled.
was the king. Yeah, the king mother would rule. And that's exactly what happened after Solomon. You had Rehoboam, Jeroboam.
Yeah,
They decided we will rule. He's like, how shall I rule? The people are asking, hey, help us out here. We'll follow you. Just care for us. Really, is what they were asking for. And then the older advisor said, if you're good to these people, they'll follow you to the ends of the
yeah,
earth,
yeah.
basically. And the younger guys are like, man, you better, yeah,
Drop the hammer.
you better show them who you are. And so he does, and splits the kingdom.
Yeah,
And so you can split a kingdom, you can split your home by exerting that sort of authority. And I've seen men who do that. I've seen women who do that. And so that's what he says is what we're not to do, because Jesus is not like that. And so he says on page 132, he talks about Joshua. And this is one of the verses we use a lot. Probably most churches use, but particularly, he's living in a time when the people of God are being idolatrous, and he's telling them, you need to choose this day whom you will serve. And he says, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. And Beeke makes a big point about saying, we will, but I think you could, pick any of those. Our house,
right.
we will serve the Lord. And this is what we're, in your household. If you have, so particularly it's about parenting. So these will be Christians with children. You just have to have it made up in your mind. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, which first means you need to learn as father, as a mother, what it means for you to follow the Lord. And if you think the Lord is difficult and harsh and all about rules and everything has to be perfect, then you're going to mirror that down to your children. And so you have to learn what it means that Jesus says he's gentle and lowly of heart, what grace is all about. And then because you're supposed to mirror that down to your children. And you need a church to help you with that. You need people to come along beside you to be able to say, hey, how do I do this? And so, yeah, but no matter what the rest of you choose to do, my family will serve the Lord to do what's right. And he uses examples like somebody says, my whole class is going to be there. We need to do this. Everybody has one of these phones. Everybody's on this game. He doesn't use all these examples, but
Those are
there's
good
many
ones.
examples. So, and so you as a parent, you can feel like I'm depriving my children of things that everybody else has. But what you have to realize is, like, even if it's everybody in the church, maybe everybody else in your church is doing something, and you have to be able to say, well, I know, and maybe they're saying we are serving the Lord, but you have to determine for yourself, is this what God would have us to do, or is it not? It may be something one family can participate in something, and it's no problem, but we can't do this as our family because there are other situations that are different. So but go ahead.
Well, and that is where, as parents, you try to discern, obviously, the good from the bad. You know, no, sorry, I know all your classmates are playing this game, but you're not going to. Like, that's an easy. That's just not good. But then you get into like even the church stuff. So a lot of churches have a gazillion different activities going on throughout the week. And they're all fine. They're all good things. But then to say, look, we are not going to participate in all of these things because that's not what is best for our family. Now, if you want to pick one activity, that's great, do that. But for our family, the health and the prioritizing us, you're not going to do all these things. Even though they're good in and of themselves, it's not what is best for us.
An example, we have a Wednesday night program that we do that we're starting back soon, and it's very helpful for a lot of families. We have a meal. It actually, for a lot of families, it helps pull them together through the week.
Mm-hmm.
Where they come home, they're quick, the homework, and they go to bed. But on Wednesday, somebody else is fixing a meal. You can come in and sit down. You get to fellowship with other people and pray, and the kids get to see other kids outside of So, but there are some families where it's like that's actually interfering with my family dynamic because of the way my family functions differently. But they can feel bad because, hey, I'm not coming, I'm not participating every time the doors are open. So you do
Yeah.
have to have the Lord's Day is the Lord's Day. And so, you participate in that, but other extra activities and things you have to decide for you and your house. And are you being rebellious? Are you being lazy? Or is it really, you have to be aware of these things. But I think in the culture where it stands, I mean, you can say, as for me and my church, we shall serve the Lord. And that's true. But each church is made up of households, and each household has to be able to say, I'm going to take this stand against the culture, whatever it may be. And they usually take steps incrementally, so there are small things that lead into larger things. And we could list lots of examples, but it would make it sound like, well, that's a bad thing to do. But it depends. If
Yeah.
everybody's doing an evil thing, we're not doing that. I don't care. It all seems perfectly acceptable. And then he says, not to get into needless contest of wills. Make sure if you're gonna what's it about picking your battles. You're going to make sure you, if you're going to make a rule and say we're not doing this, we're not doing that, make sure it's not just something. I mean, you can have preferential things as a parent. That's good, but you need to have an open mind to some things. Listen to your children or even your wife or your husband as you're like, what's your opinion of this? But then there's other things like, hey, I want to go to this R-rated movie. Or something like that. And so it's like, well, no, we're not doing that. But you might say, well, hey, there's a G-rated movie I want to go to. But I don't know. You see, that's what happens. You start going into examples.
Well, it's like the old saying, unity in the essentials and charity in the non-essentials. You can almost apply that over into your parenting in some ways. Of like, there are some firm lines in the sand. Like these are non-negotiables. In other areas, do you want to wear this shirt or that shirt to school? That okay. There's some flexibility there, or whatever. But
so
yeah, I
so
mean,
he's making the point that you make sure if you're, me and my house, we serve the Lord. It's like that God is, our book of church order says that Jesus Christ alone is Lord of the conscience. So
yeah.
that is one of the things, and so
Well, and he talks about in matters involving non-essentials or things indifferent, we can and should accommodate the wishes of our children. And that's that needless contest of will that you're talking about. Like,
right.
And maybe that's part of not exasperating your kids too, which I think he mentioned that verse, but it might be in the next.
Yeah, I think it comes up. It's in the section of verses he talks about. He says, he said this in Bible 132, we must command our households in a way that honors God. And that stood out to me because of the word commands. And the note I made is commanding our households. How might that sound to modern, culturally conditioned ears?
Like nails on a chalkboard.
Like submission.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you say words like that, man, people are like, you're legalistic, old-fashioned.
So what's the opposite of commanding your household?
anarchy.
Gently suggesting that perhaps we might not want to put our finger in the socket this time.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah, I don't know what the opposite of.
But just command, I think, maybe not the opposite of, but how do you tone it down? How would certain people say, hey, I don't want to command, but I do want to tell, just command just sounds like I'm telling somebody, I'm commanding. That's what a leader does, though, is commands. And the people beneath the leader follow the lawful commands. We have
Well,
10 commandments. We have these things we're commanded to do. And I think, I don't know, maybe it's just the way America has, he mentions it in here too, I think, a democracy or something, in a way we've learned to, politicians appeal to this constantly with us. They're leaders, but they have to get us to vote for them. And so maybe that carries over to the way we parent children. We lead them, but they're going to have to agree to let us lead them, because if they don't let us lead them, then we're being a mess. Although I think some of it too is, well, I want to lead my children, but I also want them to love me. And then you get into that, dynamic. But he makes the point here. He says, rebellion and disobedience. He's talking about page 133. It doesn't mean that everyone who has trouble with a child is not ruling his household well. And I thought that was a very good point he's making here, because one of the things he does talk about in the church, because we read the verse that says, if you rule your household well, and it says keeping his children in submission, then what happens if a child is disobedient in your household? What happens? He tells the example of a pastor who was removed from his church by his church because a daughter of his got pregnant out of wedlock, had lots of children. This one child sinned, and that was it, because I'm sure it was public. It was a big deal. And so you aren't ruling your household well because look how your child behaved. And then he said that can cause a, what's the word, that for a child to rule over the father. Hey, you're a pastor. If they find out about this, you're done. So
yeah,
things like,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it can really make you feel like it's a bad, when I see my children being disobedient. And and then you can feel like, am I qualified to be a pastor? I can't even keep my own children from sinning.
Well, if you really think about it, then you're, and I want to be careful, because the verse is in there for a reason. So you
Mm-hmm.
got to rightly divide it. But if you're going to say, Pastor, if your child sins in this way, then you're going to be removed from office. We're holding that pastor to a higher standard than we even hold God. Um, is God not our shepherd? Is God not our heavenly Father? And yet we still sin and goof up, and you know. So shall we remove God from His position
Right. So he makes the
because of
point
us?
that says, well, then the question is it God's fault or is it your fault? If your
Yeah,
child has sinned, or if you have children who are living, there's something going on with the way a child or children are behaving, then the question is, maybe you do need to look at the parenting and come along beside them and say, is this a parenting failure, or is this, you've really done all that you can do, and we're praying with you and come along beside you? And also, I think he makes the point, it's like, well, was the church helping in the, sometimes a pastor's children can be under such a microscopic, everybody looks at every little thing they do, and it can drive, maybe the parents aren't driving the children to exasperation, but a church can drive a parent's children to exasperation. And so we've been very fortunate where that's not happened. I've tried to let people know. It's like a pastor's wife. Sometimes a pastor's wife can be expected. They're hiring a 2-for-1. They hire the pastor and they want the pastor's wife to do everything. And it's like, and I've told my wife and the church at some point too. It's like, and they're being good about guarding that too. But it's like, I'm the pastor. She's not. She's another member of the church who will volunteer her time like the rest of everybody else should be doing. And our children they need grace, they need mercy, they need love. As we talked about in the last chapter, you need to be compassionate. towards your children. And then there's when we've sinned. I mean, the Bible even talks about how to handle this when we sin. You restore them with gentleness, watching yourself. And so, I think what he's getting at in here is um, that you well, what he says is we rule as kings, as loving kings, like Christ does. And Josh McDowell, I use his little quote all the time: "Rules without relationship leads to rebellion." You need to have a relationship with your children, your family, anybody you're leading. You need to have some sort of, a general's not going to know all the people under his command, but they need to know that he actually does care about the troops. So it's
Well,
an important thing.
he he kind of goes into the famous train up a child in the way that he should go, and he will not depart from it. And I know we've talked about this. So I appreciate your perspective on this, because I think that is a wildly misunderstood and misapplied verse. I hear it all the time.
Well, he hits it at the end of the chapter. Actually, he uses
Well,
J.C. Ryle on the last verse last sentence on 141. Yeah, because and I can't remember where I heard it, but it was somebody that understood Hebrew, and then I looked it up and said, instead of it necessarily being bring up a child in the way he shall go, and when he's old he won't depart from it, it is bring up a child in his way, in the way that he goes, like in a childish way, and when he's older he's not going to depart from that. He's going to continue to behave childishly. And then J.C. Ryle, here he quotes, he says, "If you would train your children rightly, train them in the way they should go and not in the way they would." And so I think that's properly. It can be taken the other way too, as long as you're looking at it as proverbial wisdom, as he says, which is typically this is the way it works. But the other way seems to be, because it's not necessarily true that if you let a child grow up in the way he wants to, he's not going to depart from it when he's old, because sometimes people do overcome their poor parenting. I mean, hopefully everybody does, because we're all imperfect. But you can have somebody that's just been parented poorly and they overcome it. But proverbial wisdom says, don't do that. Give your children the best opportunity you can to get off on a good foot. That's all we're required to do is equip them well and help them to learn how to love the Lord. And that's what he says. The point of this is teaching them how to love and follow the Lord.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is we're all still learning how to do that too. We haven't mastered the thing that we're trying to teach, but we are hopefully further along than they are. And even if somebody's just converted recently, they're still older than their children. So they have life lessons that they're able to teach.
I've just seen that a lot of misunderstanding around that proverb.
And how does that work itself out?
Well, some people they've got kids that are way off the reservation, have gone into all kinds of bad and destructive lifestyles. And these parents are weeping and just broken, because they're like, what did I do wrong? I must have done something wrong, because if I'd done it right, then they would be on this path.
Right.
And so then they're broken. And then you have other folks who are going, well, yeah, my child might be in the dumpster over here, way, way off. But I took them to church when they were kids. So God promises that they're going to come back around. And I'm careful. I'm not sure that's what that means. I think the healthiest view of it is, I absolutely love the way that you've explained it, and you've done that before, and I just appreciate that. But here's what God says: train up a child in the way they should go, and then when they're old, they won't depart from it. Okay, I'm going to actually take that as for what it says, and I'm going to train up my child in the way they should go, and trust that they won't depart from
it. And that's, you ought to train them up in the way they should go.
Yeah.
So that's verses worked a lot too, but it has caused a lot of problems with people, because it's like, but you said, and I look and see. And I don't know. I'm not going to say that the improper. I mean, who knows why we're in the state that the church is in today? But what I do see is a return of younger people with their children to say, um, we want to do this right. I have young children. I want to bring them up. Not only do I want to bring them to church, I want to have church at home. I want to be
And
and
not
that's
because
why
of
we're doing
COVID.
this. What?
And not because of COVID.
Yeah. What do you mean? Not because of COVID? Oh.
Have church at home.
I'm not doing. Yeah, I'm not doing. Yeah. Because that's good. They're not doing remote church. They are the church at home in the right way, because they're also the church in the church. They bring their household. They're
Yeah.
in the church, and so that makes church better when you have that. And so he says, um, uh, so you can have, let's see, so you have this problem where people think that they're responsible for the outcomes of their children. And then let's see, how's he just kind of goes into the biblical idea that sometimes children can rebel against good parenting. I've even had conversations with older parents who have said, um, it almost seems like it doesn't matter how I parent, or it doesn't matter how someone parents, because somebody might be an excellent parent and their child goes off this way, or somebody can be a terrible parent and the kid just turns out great. And it's like, what's the point of being a good parent when it doesn't seem to make a difference? And the best example I can think of is, I used to, I did taekwondo class. And so we'd go to these different places and we would do little, demonstrations with the children, and, flying around, breaking boards, throwing each other around, all this kind of stuff, in a good way. And we went to this one place and there was a gymnastics team that was there of children, fifth, sixth grade, seventh grade, maybe. And, they were unbelievable. I mean, this guy was out there with them and they were just like flipping and jumping. I mean, I thought, this guy's the best teacher in the world. I'm hanging it up. I'm going to say, show me how you train children to do this. And I talked to him and he said, well, he said, really, I just saw him doing it out on the playground. And I said, hey, we ought to. So he just grabbed a bunch of talented kids and said, hey, let's go do it. And I've always thought about that, because it's like, I was not a talented athletic person. And so, baseball, I was like not chosen for the team. Football, not chosen for the teams. That's why, the idea of election was so helpful to me with theology. I was like, I'm
Yeah.
chosen. And but when I started a taekwondo class, it was, let me teach you how to, don't put your foot here, turn your arm there. Why do you have your shoulder like that? Everything they were teaching, as opposed to just saying, let me pick the best ones and we'll put them on the team. And because I think you miss out on a lot of talent that way. So with children, I think there's a certain way that some children are going to go. But if you would train them, you're going to make good children better, and you're going to make bad children better, and you're going to try to do what you can to give them the best beginning. I mean, even our culture is so interesting to me to see how the culture, in the name of trying to be fair or equal or whatever, goes against God, because they're like, giving someone a good start is not fair. You know what I mean? It's like they got the example. It's like one guy starts here, one guy starts there, and then they say go, and it's like, well, that's not fair. That guy started way back there, and it's like,
And
well,
so
how
we
about
bring
instead of
everybody back.
backing me up, why don't you? So how can we do So anyway, I think that it does matter how you parent, but in the sovereignty of God, thank God that that I'm not a slave to the way my parents parented me, but I can look back at the parenting I received and see how God used it all for my good. And then if you see people who were parented well and they went poorly, well, okay, I know a guy that was on addicted to drugs, and he went to went to AA meeting at a rehab place, and so we were there, and we went. And he started telling all his story about, how he had parents that loved him and parents that cared for him, and he had a house and everything. And everybody looked at him and they was like, "What are you doing here? Why are you here?" I mean, it was blowing their minds. And I think it's because everyone in there was like, if I had had that, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
As if, and so it was just, so I wanted to say, yeah, why are you here? But at the same time, it's like the things that we blame. But the Bible says, you bring up a child, you teach a child, you train a child, but it also says that a child has a responsibility. A wise child listens to the instruction of their parents. A foolish son despises it. And so, you pray for your children. There is a sovereign God who has given us our children for a reason, and we're trusting that means that they're loved, and He's loving us by giving these children to us as well. Hey, I just talked a whole lot, and then he gets to the point where he talks about now the rod of discipline.
Yeah, now we're talking.
Yeah, I know it. So, but just before that, he talks about how it used to be when it says the Puritans taught the children to stand when the parent came in, and they would only sit after the parents have sat and things. But he does make a point. It's like you can do things like that, but that's external obedience, and you can get external obedience and lose. You don't have the children's heart. So
Sure.
I knew a lot of Eddie Haskell. Man, that's what just makes me feel old. So you know who Eddie Haskell is? So
Context, I might.
Leave It to Beaver. So it was before my time too, but I watched it on reruns. And Eddie Haskell was the jerk kid that was always he's causing problems and just a bad influence. But anytime he was in front of the parents, he was always, "Hello, Mrs. Cleaver. Hello, Mr.
Right.
Cleaver." Everybody loved him. He was the guy that everybody loved, but he was it's just so that was Eddie Haskell. So everybody knew what that was like.
Felt like Mouth from the Goonies.
I'm trying to, which one's Mouth?
I
haven't seen that in a while either. So he behaved well.
Yes,
now I remember the guy that Marty.
Oh, he's like speaking.
Yeah.
Corey Feldman.
Corey Feldman. That's what it is, right?
He's like,
exactly.
I know Spanish. Let me translate for
you.
And
he's making it up. Yeah. Right. So it's like that. So you can get external obedience, and but Judas was externally obedient. Too. So you had to be very careful with that. There's nothing wrong with external obedience, but what you have to make sure is the example I've heard is you can paint your house, but if the wiring's bad, it's going to do no good. So we're after our children's hearts.
On a pig.
Yeah. So, and we're after our children's hearts, and proper obedience is important. But when you start to worry more about how you're making me look in public, and you start to be harsh with your children, it's a difficult thing. So he says we should teach proper respect and all these things, but that we're losing that teaching of respect. And he says it's considered old fashioned. And it shows up in the workplace and schools and churches, and especially in the home. In too many homes, the children rule the roost. And he says in the next little section, he says that we're to exercise this loving rule, and that love without rule is spoiling our children. So if you love them, but you don't rule, you're spoiling them. And if you rule without loving, then you're going to provoke them to anger. There's your Ephesians 6:4. So the principle is we're going to rule in love, and he defines love as love for God, his word, and for our children, and the desire to secure the kind of order in the home that gives them a safe, wholesome, nurturing environment. And I thought that was very order is important, and not just, you can have a father or a mother who just wants, or there will be order. I went to my grandmother's house. They always had the plastic over their sofas, which now I understand. But yeah.
Crazy.
Well, yeah, the kids were gone. They got this nice furniture out. Then grandkids come in. It's like plastic. That's what we're doing. We used slip covers, but anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, you have to have rule. It's very bad for children to grow up in a home that is chaotic. I mean, some amount of chaos can't help you. You got to have. Amy had a wonderful idea when the kids were growing up. She put linoleum floors down. She's just like, we had carpet everywhere. It's like, just if we just put linoleum down, something spills, then we just wipe it up.
Mop
It's
it
like,
up.
yes. And then not worrying about your house being perfect when people come over. There's just these things that children, if you hold them to a standard that they can't bear, then you're going. But there has to be rule and it has to be order. What would you say about that?
Well, absolutely, and they everybody, not just kids, but just people in general, thrive when there are boundaries and order. I mean, that's how we've been created to operate, is within certain boundaries, and I think we see it most specifically with kids, but I mean, we see it at school all the time. I mean, you have to have order in the classroom, or else nobody is going to benefit. It's just chaos, and you can't. And like I said, nobody's being blessed by that. Not the people who want chaos, not the people who don't want chaos. Not the teachers, not anybody.
And I need
Um,
a child. Here's one thing I like about teaching at Oaks Academy, for the most part, because if any kids listen to this, I don't want them to hear me say this about them. For the most part, these kids are well behaved. They are and what makes them well behaved is they are respectful to adults,
well,
and it's just taught. I mean, and they're not. And then I see their parents. I'm waiting for, some parents going to be walking in. They'll have paddles in their hands, getting ready to, but they don't. But they also do not treat their children like they're equals.
that I was going to say that earlier,
Okay.
um, and we just kind of, and I forgot about it. But that's our world. Our culture is so addicted, and now it's not even equality; it's equity. Kind of what you were talking about, like, if we can't all start at the same place, we're all going to start way back here.
Yeah, to make
you know,
everybody have equal outcomes,
yeah,
regardless of
right,
effort
right.
that's put into it.
So let's pretend it's just equality, because that used to be the thing, um, but we're not. Um, and I don't mean that ugly. Like, we're all equal, of equal value before God. The Imago Dei. Um, you know, man, woman, child, black, white, whatever. We're all equally valuable and all equally created in the image of God. So yes, but it's like I've had to tell our kids sometimes, like, you and I are not the same. We're not equals. Like, I am your parent, you are my child. Not only do I have, you know, at minimum 30 years of life experience on you, but I've been placed, and mommy has been placed in a place of authority over you. And so we're going to exercise that. And the crazy part is, that's going to be good for you. That's going to be good for us, because we come under authority. We come under God's authority. If we work in a workplace, we come under our boss's authority. We come under the government's authority. You know, that's the way God has created it. And in some ways, yes, we are equal, but in some ways, we're most definitely not equal. And in those ways, you submit to the authority over you.
And I tend to, whenever I use a martial arts example, I apologize for it. But I spent a lot of my life doing this stuff. There's so many things. I had this assistant instructor who was awesome, and he came to me one day and he says, the kids don't listen to me like they do you. Why won't they listen to me? And I said, because you're one of them. And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "You go out and you play with them. You don't like for them to call you Mister. You want to be one of them. And so if one of them tells one of them to do something, they're not going to listen to them. And but he said they like you. They love you." And I said, "Yeah, they like you and they love you too. But it was hard for me to take that mantle of leadership. Mr. Black, Master Black, you will bow to your sensei. So which that's just a wonderful thing too. It's like popping him in the head and stuff. It's like that's not how you gain and earn respect. But I think that parents who, and there's so much fear. and this is another thing the world has done that's contrary to God. A perfect love casts out fear. Cast your anxiety upon me because I care for you. And you have children, you have parents who are being held. Um, what's the word I'm looking for? They're being held in slavery to
Hostage.
a hostage to the ideology that if I discipline my children, they're gonna kill themselves. They're going to go down into
Be criminals.
anxiety levels. They're going to all these things, and then you see children today. They're just like, what are they? Yeah, they're fearful. They're anxious. They don't know. They have all these problems, and then you have parents who are afraid to to be leaders in the home because if I tell you to do something, don't do something, that's going to cause you anxiety.
And
Well,
it's because of lack of boundaries.
hmm, yeah, and it's what shalom is. The peace. The word for peace in Hebrew is more than just peace. It's or things are, God, the earth was tohu vavohu, it was without form and void, and then the Spirit of God hovers at the face of the deep, and He brings order out of the chaos, and that's what we want to do with children. I mean, if you have children that come into your home from a chaotic home, and you bring them in, and you're nurturing them. I mean, one of the things that they need to understand is this: we're safe. I had a conversation with my grandson today. I said, you're he got in trouble for something, and it's just like, and he's kind of like, my concern is as he gets older, this little tendency to like say, yeah, I'm doing that. Well, he's kind of this little grumbly back. It's like I'm not liking the way that's going to sound when he's 15, 16 years old. You know what I
Uh,
mean? So I'm like, okay. I said, listeners, I want you to know, we love you. You're great. You've got a personality. You're a loving, kind individual, but you have to learn how to control yourself. You have to learn how to deal with your emotions because when you get older and you go out into the world, you're adding to chaos. And we're supposed to be peacemakers. And he's got, I don't know, you can talk to him about the gospel because we just talk about the gospel. We we live in a life that is saturated in the church in Christ. It's easier in a way because I'm a pastor, but I love the fact that we have adults with children who aren't pastors who are pastoring their children well and make me feel like I better step up my game a little bit here. So
yeah,
that's what's wonderful about it. And I just think and if you're a parent, I know people who are like, it's too late for me. It's like, well, one, it's never too late. Story's not over yet. You pray. Or, one parent is like saying, I'm ready to do this. And another parent is like, I'm not. And so so there's a leadership thing that has to happen between the parents first, where rather than exercising authority, you're exercising leadership. I just read this somewhere. I was listening. The difference between authority and leadership, like authoritarianism and leadership, where what you're doing is you're modeling and demonstrating and calling people to follow. Paul said, imitate me as I'm imitating Christ. And so, I think that's what he's calling us to here. But he says, first, we have a clear 135, where we're running all out of time, just a clear biblical mandate to discipline. And he talks about lots of these things in here about spare the rod, spoil the child, discipline your son while there's hope. And I liked on page 135, the Psalm, Proverb 19:18. I had to look this one up. It says, chasten, which means discipline thy son while there's hope, and let not thy soul spare for his crying. And I thought, okay, so so I'm sorry you're crying, but I'm gonna do this anyway. And I thought that's King James. So
that's
what's
right.
so I pull up your little app. You get all the like Blue Letter Bible app, and you get all these things. And so look at all these. And so the ESV and different more modern ones say, "Do not direct your soul to put him to death." It's like, so chasing him, but don't direct your soul to put him to death. So then that sounds like, yeah, you need to discipline him, but don't kill him. I thought, well, wait a second.
That's different.
But then you look at, so here's what I love about Hebrew uh, parallelism. Hebrew poetry uses parallelism, and this is, proverbial wisdom is a type of Hebrew poetry even. So they use parallelism here. So with the parallelism, this is what I think is happening. He says, chasten thy son while there's hope. Okay, so there's still hope. So discipline while there's hope, and do not direct your soul to put him to death. And I think what it's saying is, if you go ahead,
No, finish, because
let's see
I've got
what.
a different translation, so this can
Okay, we'll
go together.
see if it goes with mine,
Yeah.
because I think what he's saying is, if you do not discipline him while there's hope, then you are directing his soul towards death.
Oh, okay, that's different.
Okay.
I like that. I think that works.
Mm.
Mine. So this is a CSB. It says, "Discipline your son while there's hope. Don't set your heart on being the cause of his death." But
It's
here's how
same
I'm.
thing there.
But here's how I'm reading that. Don't worry that you're going to cause him to die by disciplining him.
Mm.
Like don't be afraid that I'm going to
Let not thy soul spare for his crying.
that. And
Mm.
I think that goes along with the King James, which is kind of what like, oh, you're crying. Well, I don't.
I'll say
I
it
can't.
again.
I can't let your
This is the
Christ.
Baptist translation, right?
Yeah.
CSV. What's it say?
Discipline your
I've
son
heard.
while there is hope. Don't set your heart on being the cause of his death. Not like
Uh,
don't get excited about killing him,
but
but
don't be afraid that you disciplining him is going to kill him.
which is exactly what
Yeah,
you've been
right.
talking about, kind of the modern idea of if I discipline my kid, they're going to hate me or cut themselves.
Mm.
You
It's
know,
the opposite. It's the lie.
right.
Wow. All right. So next chapter,
So,
well, the chapter after next, he talks about this rod stuff. And so,
yeah,
but here's the thing. So David grew up, King David. Um, who was his father? Jesse. Was that?
Jesse. Yeah.
Yeah. So Psalm 23. So the Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. His rod and his staff comforts me. So the staff is you're guiding the sheep, but that rod is used to beat off predators. But it can also be because David growing, he's Hebrew, he knows all these things, and the rod is a euphemism for discipline. His switch. It's you don't go
Yeah.
after predators with a switch. But I think that's kind of the idea of this rod idea we have in our mind, because a rod can be, if I picked up a rod and start beating my child with a rod, I think somebody might ought to intervene. But the Bible says beat them with a rod lest they go. You just gotta. That's why you have to do the proper type of exegesis where you're doing the historico-grammatical stuff. So what did they mean by beating your
Yeah.
child with a rod back then? And all it meant was corporal discipline of some
Yeah.
sort. So, and he'll talk about later. So we have another chapter that comes up that talks about how do you properly do that.
Yeah.
And I know you don't do it out of anger, but the verbal stuff you don't do out of anger, and that's the hard thing. Disciplining your child, typically, maybe I shouldn't say typically, but oftentimes when you're disciplining your child is because they've angered you, but it's something they probably need to be disciplined for. But you've been angered, and if I've been angered, how do I not discipline out of anger? And so what you have to do is figure that one out, because it can get to be a habit where all you're doing is just degrading. I don't like, if I worked for somebody and they did me like that all the time, I'd quit. And that's driving them to exasperation. Do you find that to be something you struggle with at all, or are you just real good at that?
No, I don't like where this conversation's going because it's getting too personal now.
So the next one says, but we'll get there. So, but the idea is you do have a responsibility to discipline in this
Yeah.
way, but you also you have a responsibility to do it properly. The second thing on page 137 says you need to have a good biblical goal for it. And he says your goal is to teach our children to obey God. And I think some of the times the way he words things can come across a bit straight, because for
Kind of
middle
high
he talks.
minded.
Well, yeah, but it's not wrong. It's just, so he says, like God punishes us, he disciplines us. He says God applies the discipline in various ways, including corporal punishment with us. And he says in forms of sickness, chronic illness, painful injuries, and other bodily afflictions
Oh,
to bring us back to him. And I'm like, but later he kind of says, but
but
every
not all
illness
the time.
isn't. Yeah, but I'm almost of the camp where I'm not ever. Okay, I've had like last week when I came on late is because I was going through a physical therapy session.
Yeah,
I've had
yeah.
a pinched nerve. I couldn't even raise. I was pitiful, pitiful, pitiful. Couldn't sleep. Oh, woe is me! It's so bad. I'm sure I hurt worse than most people hurt all the time. But for me, it was just I'd wake up 2 hours, and so I'm sleeping in the bed. I'm sleeping on the sofa. I'm waking up, and I'm praying. It's like, Lord, remove this from me. This is terrible. And I know people are worse off. I know people, I almost feel like guilty for asking, but I know I'm supposed to ask, and it does hurt. So help. And so I could say, what have I done wrong? What sin am I being chastised for that's causing me this pain? And I'll stop doing it. And I know in my mind, I'll stop whatever it is. I'll stop until I get better.
And then we'll
This is
start right back
because
up.
God does not discipline. I mean, everything that comes into our life is any hard thing, any good thing. We're supposed to look at and examine and say, how am I supposed to deal with this? What am I supposed to learn from this? Everything that happens, but
Yeah.
the discipline, and maybe it's different in different people's lives, but for me, the discipline that happens in my life is when something that I'm my own worst enemy, and now I'm suffering for it, and not necessarily because my arm hurts, but because my heart's hurting, because I've done this thing, I've hurt somebody, it's just a heart thing where and then how do you get past it?
Well,
And
and
then because the gospel has to be the salve for it. How is the gospel the salve for my neck that hurts?
well, it depends on which
What
gospel you listen to, I guess.
it's true, but the gospel, but the God that I'm crying to is the God that loves me in spite of all these things, But maybe if I hurt my back because I was trying to steal, watermelons out of well, that'll teach you, and that's true. But I
But
just think there's too many people that see. Go ahead, I'm rambling anyway.
it's there's too many variables. Number one, some of our physical ailments are just simply a result of the curse in general,
And
right?
apparently, old age.
Right.
That's what I hear.
Uh,
That's ridiculous.
some of it, I mean, the book of Job completely eliminates
Thank you. That's good.
everything. Yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
because obviously he was righteous,
And
and
yet he
yet,
certainly learned about God in the midst of it.
and it was
Mm-hmm.
it, it was to show God's holiness and worthiness, through that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to Satan, like, no, I'm so worthy that this guy's going to worship me even if I take away everything.
Right. And will
Uh,
we?
right, and that
Mm-hmm.
kind of undercuts any prosperity
Right.
teaching.
And just because we're close to our
Oh,
time.
sorry, yeah.
And I always say, well, no, don't be sorry. I'm the one that's used it all up.
Well, no,
Page
you're
139, he says, as adults, we must submit to the authority of others. We must submit to the authority of others at home, church, community work, even in our recreations as we play team sports with officials and referees. And I would say, well, yeah, but as your children are playing team sports, don't it's the worst thing in the world to watch parents who cannot control themselves when their children are on the field. And I know what it's like from teaching martial arts classes and stuff for a long time. It's like anyway, it's like if you don't respect authority in front of your children and you are their authority, you are teaching them not to respect you. And so you got to be careful with that. But he makes a point: godly authority, godly commands. So if the authorities come and tell you do something that's not right, you don't do it. But now you're on shaky ground. You better make just like all this COVID stuff when people started. The government's telling you not to meet, the government's telling you not to do this, and you're going to disobey those orders. That's fine, but make sure you're right, because this
yeah,
is a serious thing that you're doing, not just because it's the government, because God tells us to submit. And same thing with a husband or a wife. A wife, submit to your husband. Well, what if, there's certain times you can't do that? Well, you understand that you're in a place that make sure you're right. Don't just say, I'm just going to. So, which is a good point. If the wife's not going to respect the husband, and because you feel like the husband's not respectable, then help him to be more respectable. Help them to see, you model these things before your children. Third was clear biblical means of discipline, verbal reproof, corporal physical punishment at times. And again, he's going to talk about this more. He even gets into a Lord's Supper, that the reason the people in Corinth were being disciplined was because of how they were celebrating the Lord's Supper. I disagree with that. I think Paul, the church was not loving each other at all. They were terrible. They were just doing all sorts of things wrong. And then he says, and then you come to the Lord's table, and he uses the Lord's table as an example of the hypocrisy that what you're doing in the church. He's saying it's not even the Lord's Supper that you're taking.
Right.
And so, when I get into these things too much, but I just think that it really comes down to the heart, the way that we love each other and care for one another, and particularly our children. Thomas Guthrie says, if a parent does not punish his sons will certainly punish him.
Yeah.
And so you have a responsibility to the world. You're going to unleash these children that are going to be adults on everybody, and they need to learn at an early age how to behave in public, as appropriate for their ages, and so that they can help build a more peaceful world, that pointing people to Christ.
Andrea,
All
right. Andrea often says to our kids when she's working with them like that is, I want to make sure that you're a blessing to your future spouse.
Oh, yes, absolutely. You're a good parent to my grandkids. So what are we up to on
Here
our
we go. We got
9-8?
2 Samuel 9:8. You're going to love it.
We already did 1 Samuel 9-8?
Yeah, we did that last week because Ruth didn't have 9 chapters. And he paid homage and said, what is your servant that you should show regard for a dead dog such as I?
Oh, dead dogs. Dead dogs. We got to do something with dead dogs. That's good. Oh, that sounded terrible.
That'll be our name. That'll be our little
dead dogs.
Name.
See, that's a good one. That sounds like one of those military things.
Yeah, we're the dead dogs.
Yeah. Do a logo.
A dog with X's for eyes.
Put your son on that. That's a good, yeah. That's something. I like that. Oh, my dog came walking in.
Yeah.
You talking? All right. So, thank you, Christian. We're praying for Wes and Sierra and the Oxendines too. Yeah. And and so thank you, and I will see you Thursday. All right.
Sounds good.
God bless.
Thank you, sir.